The Pentagon just fired Harvard. Let me say that again. The United States military just told the most prestigious university in America, we're done with you. No more training, no more programs, no more sending our best officers to learn from you. And the reason? The defense secretary says Harvard turned our soldiers into globalists with radical ideologies. This is Pete Hegseth, the guy who literally returned his own Harvard diploma on Fox News with "Return to Sender" written on it in Sharpie, and now he's in charge of the entire Department of Defense. So yeah, this just got real. Let me tell you what happened, because this is way bigger than just one university getting cut off. This is about a culture war that's now reached the highest levels of national security, and it's about to get a lot worse. On Friday, February 7th, 2026, Pete Hegseth released a statement saying that starting with the 2026-27 school year, the Pentagon will discontinue all graduate-level professional military education, all fellowships, and all certificate programs with Harvard University. Gone, finished, over. Military officers who are currently attending Harvard, they can finish their courses, but no new people. And here's the kicker. He said other Ivy League schools are under evaluation and could be next. Think about what that means. Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Penn, they're all on notice. The Pentagon is basically saying, get in line with what we want, or you're out too. Now, the Pentagon and Harvard have a relationship that goes back to the founding of this country. George Washington used Harvard Yard as a base for the Continental Army in 1775. Harvard has produced more Medal of Honor recipients than any other civilian university. Generations of military leaders got their graduate degrees there. The Kennedy School has programs specifically designed for military officers. This isn't some random college. This is Harvard. And the Pentagon just cut them off completely. Hegseth's statement was brutal. He said Harvard no longer meets the needs of the War Department or the military services. War Department, he's even calling it the War Department instead of the Defense Department. That's intentional. He said that for too long, the military has sent its best and brightest officers to Harvard, hoping the university would better understand and appreciate the warrior class. But instead, he said, too many of our officers came back looking too much like Harvard. Heads full of globalist and radical ideologies that do not improve our fighting capability or our readiness. Let me translate that for you. He's saying Harvard brainwashed our soldiers. He's saying they went in as patriots and came out as woke globalists who don't love America anymore. That's a serious accusation. That's not just saying education isn't useful. That's saying it's actively harmful to national security. Hegseth also accused Harvard of hate America activism and called the university anti-Semitic. He's referring to the pro-Palestinian protests that happened on campus after October 7th and Israel's war in Gaza. Harvard had student demonstrations. Faculty signed letters. There were accusations that Jewish students felt unsafe. And the university's response, according to Hegseth and the Trump administration, was completely inadequate. Now, I need to give you context here. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The Trump administration has been at war with Harvard for over a year. They've already frozen billions of dollars in federal research funding. They tried to block foreign students from enrolling. They've demanded that Harvard make massive changes to how it operates, changes to diversity programs, changes to admissions, changes to how it handles protests. Trump personally said this week that his administration is seeking $1 billion from Harvard to settle various investigations into the school's policies. $1 billion. That's not a negotiation, that's extortion. And Harvard has refused to comply. They've fought back legally. They've said the administration is engaging in illegal retaliation because Harvard won't adopt Trump's ideological views. So this Pentagon decision, it's the next escalation. It's Trump saying, you won't play ball? Fine. We'll cut you off completely. And Pete Hegseth is the perfect person to deliver that message. This guy has a personal vendetta against Harvard. He got his master's degree there. And then in 2022, when he was a Fox News commentator, he went on TV and literally mailed his diploma back to Harvard. He wrote "Return to Sender" on the envelope with a Sharpie. He said Harvard had betrayed everything it once stood for. And now, as defense secretary, he dug up that clip and posted it on official Pentagon social media accounts. The Department of Defense posted a video of their boss returning his diploma to Harvard. Let that sink in. Here's what's actually going to happen now. The Pentagon runs various programs that send military officers to civilian universities for graduate education. These aren't just random classes. We're talking about master's degrees in public policy, international relations, and strategic studies. The idea is that senior officers need to understand more than just military tactics. They need to understand diplomacy, economics, and politics. They need to be able to work with civilian leaders and understand complex global issues. Harvard has been a major part of that program. The Kennedy School of Government has specialized fellowships for military officers. They study alongside future diplomats, future members of Congress, future world leaders. The networking alone is incredibly valuable, and now that's gone. The military will redirect those officers to other schools, war colleges run by the military itself, maybe some state universities. But you know what they won't have? The prestige, the connections, the exposure to diverse viewpoints. Because that's the whole point. Hegseth doesn't want military officers exposed to globalist and radical ideologies. He wants them studying at institutions that align with the Trump administration's worldview. This is about control. This is about making sure the next generation of military leaders thinks the right way. And if you think that's an exaggeration, listen to what Hegseth actually said. He said officers came back from Harvard with heads full of globalist and radical ideologies. What does that mean? What are globalist ideologies? Does it mean learning about international law? Does it mean understanding diplomacy? Does it mean studying climate change or human rights? Because all of those things get taught at Harvard. All of those things are relevant to military leadership in the 21st century, but apparently all of those things are now considered dangerous radical ideas. Let me give you my take on this. What if Hegseth is actually right about one thing? What if there is a problem with how elite universities approach national security and military issues? I'm not saying Harvard brainwashes people, but I am saying that elite universities have their own biases. They tend to be skeptical of military force. They tend to prioritize diplomacy and international institutions. They tend to view American power through a critical lens. And for some military officers, especially those who've spent their entire careers in the military, going to Harvard might feel like culture shock. You're suddenly surrounded by professors and students who question everything you've done. Who thinks the wars you fought were mistakes? Who think American foreign policy is fundamentally flawed? I can see how that would be frustrating. I can see how some officers might come back feeling conflicted about their service. But here's the thing. That's not brainwashing. That's education. That's being exposed to different perspectives. That's learning to think critically about complex issues. And frankly, we should want our military leaders to be exposed to criticism and different viewpoints. We should want them to understand why other people see things differently, because that's what makes good strategic thinkers. You don't want generals who only know one way to think. You want generals who can understand the enemy's perspective, who can predict how adversaries will respond, who can work with allies who have different values and priorities. And you get that by exposing them to diverse ideas, not by keeping them in an ideological bubble. On the other hand, what if this is actually about accountability? What if Trump and Hegseth looked at Harvard's handling of the pro-Palestinian protests and said, this is completely unacceptable? Jewish students were being harassed. Faculty members were signing letters justifying Hamas's attack on October 7th. The university president couldn't even say that calling for genocide against Jews violated Harvard's code of conduct. And you want us to keep sending our officers there? You want us to keep funding this institution? I can understand that argument, I really can. If Harvard can't protect Jewish students from anti-Semitic harassment, if Harvard faculty are actively supporting terrorists, then yeah, maybe the Pentagon shouldn't be partnering with them. But here's where it gets complicated. Who decides what counts as anti-Semitism? Who decides what counts as legitimate protest versus harassment? Because the Trump administration has been very clear that they consider any criticism of Israel to be anti-Semitic. Any support for Palestinian rights is terrorism. Any protest against the Gaza war is hate speech. And that's a problem, because you can condemn Hamas and still criticize Israel's response. You can support Israel's right to exist and still think Netanyahu's government is making terrible decisions. But the Trump administration doesn't see it that way. They see it in black and white. You're either with Israel completely or you're an anti-Semite. And Harvard, like most universities, has students and faculty with a range of views on Israel and Palestine. Some support Israel, some support Palestine. Some are somewhere in the middle. And the university's position has been, we support free speech and open debate on all sides. The Trump administration's position is, that's not good enough. You need to shut down the pro-Palestinian voices. You need to punish students who criticize Israel. And when Harvard refused to do that, Trump cut their funding, and now the Pentagon is cutting ties. So what's really going on here? Is this about protecting Jewish students, or is it about punishing a university that won't submit to political pressure? I think it's both. And that's what makes this so messy. Here's what nobody's talking about. The military officers who went to Harvard, they're not idiots. They're not sheep who get brainwashed by professors. These are senior officers, majors, lieutenant colonels, people who've been in the military for 15 or 20 years. They've led troops in combat. They've made life and death decisions. And Hegseth is basically saying these people are so weak-minded that a year at Harvard turns them against America. That's insulting. That's insulting to the officers. That's insulting to the military. If your military leaders are that easily influenced by a few professors, you've got way bigger problems than Harvard. And there's another angle here that's getting overlooked. Other countries are going to take advantage of this. China sends its military officers to study abroad. Russia does too. They want their officers to understand how other countries think. They want them to speak foreign languages. They want them to build relationships with future leaders from allied and rival nations. And now the United States is pulling back from that. We're saying our officers shouldn't study at elite universities because they might learn the wrong things. That's not strength. That's a weakness. That's insecurity. That's saying we're so afraid our officers might question our policies that we need to keep them away from challenging ideas. And that's not how you build a strong military. That's how you build an insular, rigid, ideological military that can't adapt to a changing world. Let's talk about what happens next. Hegseth said other Ivy League universities are under evaluation. That means Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Penn, Dartmouth, Brown, Cornell. They're all wondering if they're next. And you know what some of them are probably doing right now? They're calling the White House. They're asking what they need to do to stay in Trump's good graces. They're thinking about changing their policies on protests. They're thinking about firing faculty members who are too critical of Israel or too critical of Trump. They're thinking about compliance, because they don't want to lose Pentagon contracts. They don't want to lose federal funding. They don't want to be the next Harvard. And that's exactly what Trump wants. He wants universities to be afraid. He wants them to self-censor. He wants them to conform. Because if he can control what gets taught at elite universities, he can control the next generation of leaders. But here's the thing. Harvard doesn't need the Pentagon as much as the Pentagon needs Harvard. Harvard's endowment is over $50 billion. They're not going broke because they lost some military fellowship programs. But the Pentagon, they just cut themselves off from one of the best universities in the world. They just told their officers, you can't study at the institution that trains future presidents, future senators, future CEOs, future diplomats. You can't build relationships with the next generation of American leaders because we're mad at them for not shutting down protests. That's short-sighted. That's stupid. That's putting politics over national security. And you know who's happy about this? China, Russia, Iran. Our adversaries love it when America fights with its own institutions. They love it when we weaken ourselves from within. One more thing, Hegseth mentioned that Harvard has research partnerships with the Chinese Communist Party. He said that's another reason they're cutting ties. And okay, that's a legitimate concern. A lot of universities have accepted money from Chinese institutions. Some of that money comes with strings attached. Some of it involves sharing research that could have military applications. That's a real problem. But you know what the solution is? It's not to cut off Harvard entirely. It's to work with them to end those partnerships. It's to put restrictions on what kind of research can be shared. It's to be strategic about it. Instead, Trump's approach is, you did something we don't like, so we're nuking the entire relationship. That's not a strategy. That's emotion. That's revenge. And you can't run national security on revenge. Look, I don't know if this decision will stand. Maybe the next president will reverse it. Maybe Harvard will cave and make whatever changes Trump wants. Maybe the courts will step in and say this is illegal retaliation. I don't know. But what I do know is this. When you start limiting where military officers can study because you're afraid they'll learn the wrong things, you're not making the military stronger. You're making it weaker. When you start using federal funding and Pentagon contracts as weapons to force universities to conform to a political agenda, you're not protecting free speech, you're destroying it. And when you prioritize ideological purity over education and excellence, you're not serving the country, you're serving the party. And that should scare all of us, regardless of what we think about Harvard or Trump or Pete Hegseth. All right, I need to know what you think. Do you support the Pentagon cutting ties with Harvard because of anti-Semitism and woke ideology? Or do you think this is the Trump administration abusing its power to punish a university that won't submit to political pressure? And here's the key question. Should the military limit where officers can study based on the university's politics? Drop your answer in the comments. Be honest. Be specific. Tell me why you think the way you do. If this story matters to you, subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, because this is just the beginning. Other universities are next, and you need to know what's coming. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening to higher education in America. I'll see you in the next one.